say, well, he's God, he kind of does that miracle thing sometimes, and food. The Lord said to Moses, is the Lord's power limited? Whenever you see God ask a question in the Bible, if I want to teach my students how to use a rhetorical question, this is a great example. Go to one of the questions God asks. Because when God asks a rhetorical question, it's not one of those, I've read so many papers, where like a student starts off with a rhetorical question. Have you ever wondered why an orange is different than a grapefruit? I have. Like, I'm reading the paper saying, you don't need to ask the question. Tell me the information. You're not asking a question because you're trying to demonstrate something. You're asking a question because you're asking a question because you don't know what to say. Right? That's how I feel whenever we use rhetorical questions. But when God asks a question, a rhetorical question, it is rhetorical. Rhetorical means you're proving a point. When God asks a question of someone, it's one of those like lose your battles moments, right? I maybe shouldn't say anything. Keep that in mind whenever you see God ask a question, because that's what's going on. Is the Lord's power limited? Now you, Moses, shall see whether my word will come true for you or not. Whether I can provide for my people or not. You're asking me if I can do what I said I'm going to do. So Moses went out and told the people the words of the Lord. Also he gathered the 70 men of the elders of the people and stationed them around the tent. So there's a process with the people. We're going to skip some of that. We're going to jump back to verse 31. Now, this is where the meat comes in. Now there went forth a wind from the Lord, and it brought quail from the sea, and it let them fall. It let them thunk right down on the camps around them. It's like this, a picture, there was some situation, I don't know if anyone's ever heard of this, there's some situation in history where all of a sudden it just like rained fish in this one area because there had been a hurricane or something, and it sucked up a bunch of water and this fish and dumped them out like on the land. Everyone's sitting there going, where did all this fish come from? That's kind of what I picture here. I don't know exactly the situation, but this wind blows up off the sea, the quail migrate here, and it catches all these quail and it drops them onto the ground. In piles, about a day's journey on this side and a day's journey on that side, all around the camp, and about 2 cubits, it's about 3 feet deep. So Moses says, how are you going to provide meat for all these people? God says, you don't think I can do it? And then all of a sudden there's all these like dead birds. And I'm like, oh, there they are. Now, remember what I said earlier about the manna. What were they supposed to do with the manna?
Eat it on one day.
What?
Gather it every day and eat it all in one day.
Gather it on one day, eat it that day. Every day you gather. For the last couple of years. They've been out in the wilderness for a couple of years at this point. Like, all right, it's that time again. Gotta go out, pick up my manna. Hey, every day, they should be pretty used to this. So now, there's all this meat around. The people spent all day and all night and all the next day and gathered the quail. But there's manna. Manna came every day, except for the Sabbath. If there's manna, they're supposed to gather it every day. They spend 2 days straight picking up dead birds. Right? He who gathered least gathered 10 homers. A homer is approximated. The low estimates are around 40-some pounds. So everyone's getting a few hundred pounds of quail, and they're all gathering them up. And they spread them out for themselves all around the camp. Can anyone see why this might not be the best situation? for everyone to gather a couple hundred pounds of meat and just kind of hang it up everywhere. What? That hurt someone's ear. Anybody see what might not be a good idea? What?
It's spoiled.
Right. Now, remember a couple books earlier, there's the law that God gives, right? And some of the law had to do with health. He tells them, animals that you have for meat, if they die, the person who touches them is unclean for, I forget, 2 days, something like that. So if you touch the dead animal, right, you have to kind of separate yourself and make sure you're clean. Because I don't know about any of you, but when I was a little kid, like dead animals were kind of fascinating, but at the same time they were kind of gross. And it was one of those things that, like, before you really know, your parents have to tell you, no, that's dead, don't touch that. Because you always get those like 3-year-olds, they're like, oh, it's a dead mouse, and they like pick it up. And whenever you have a dead mouse, it's always like been dead for like a day. It's kind of, it's only kind of mouse, you know what I mean? It's like, no, that's unclean. Right? Don't pick up dead animals and bring them around and like put them all around your camp because God told you it's unclean. Right? God gave you law that says you don't just pick up dead animals and hang them all around your camp and start eating them. While the meat was still between their teeth, before it was chewed, the nostrils of the Lord burned against the people, and the Lord struck the people with a very severe plague. Now, it doesn't say this, it's just what I think, but it seems like you can understand why I think it. I think that this plague is disease. Sometimes when God does something like this, when God uses something, sometimes it's a really natural thing that he uses, sometimes it's a miraculous thing that he uses. When the Bible says that God did something, it doesn't always mean that it's a miracle. But it does mean that God did it. So God struck the people with a very severe plague. This is one of those sections in the Old Testament that's kind of tough to deal with. Because when you look at the New Testament, you see listen to how the world talks about who Jesus is. The world will talk about Jesus as someone who accepted anybody, he didn't judge anybody, he loved everybody, and a lot of that is mostly true. But one thing that you do see is that Jesus wasn't just tending to people's bodies. He wasn't just in a ministry of feeding the hungry and healing the sick. Because when he did those things, he was concerned about their spirits. When he speaks to the woman caught in adultery, right, he comes down and says, where are your, right, he gets everyone to leave, and he says, where are your accusers? Right, neither do I accuse you, but go and sin no more. And that even Jesus knew that God has a way he wants us to live. God ministered to people's bodies because our bodies in this world, in this land that we're in now, are inextricably connected to our souls. You can't feed someone's soul without feeding their body. Right? You try to feed a soul without feeding a body, it dies. You can, though, feed a body without feeding a soul. And that happens to be all the world can do. The world wants to look at the situation and say, you know, they're the same thing. They want to look at the church and reform the church so that the church is in the business of helping people's bodies. And the church should do those things. That should be something that flows out of our love for people that God puts in us. Right? We can't love people's souls without loving their bodies. But if we are just loving people's bodies, we are not doing what God has said the church should do. We are doing what the world has said people should do. That's something important to think about. God uses all kinds of things for his purpose. And it's hard to think about God as a God of justice, as a God of vengeance. The Old Testament refers to God as a God of wrath. It should be a struggle for us to take what God reveals about himself and understand that in light of what we see in God. What the world wants to say about God, not this God, but about God, is if you don't like an idea about God, that's not who God is. I don't believe in a God who does that. What God says about God, what Jesus says about God, what the Apostle Paul says about God, is when God says something about who he is, you better find a way for that to make sense in what you believe about God. And that's a struggle. That's something I've struggled with a lot. There are still questions I have about God and how he deals with the world that that still frankly make me kind of uncomfortable. But my solution is not to say, well, that's not who God is. My solution is not to say, well, if I don't like what I see about God, all I have to do is reform who I think God is. All I have to do is create God in the image of what I want him to be. God should be changing me into the image he wants me to be. There's a big difference between how the world deals with some of these issues and how we deal with some of these issues. And God is in a process of taking us out of the world, out of what the world says is okay, and into what God wants us to be. They named this place Kibroth Hattaavah because there they buried the people who had been greedy, lustful. Right? The riffraff from the beginning of the passage. From Kibroth Hattaavah, the people set forth out to Hazeroth, and they remained at Hazeroth. God is continually leading them in a process toward where he wants them to be. Like I said, this is a slow process. And it's a process that we have to be patient with other people in because it's not a process that we work in other people's lives. You are not in this position to be judging other people, to be trying to lead other people into where you want them to go. What we need to do is go to God about the concerns. But that is one thing that Moses did do right. He did go to God. Now, he had some issues, now he went to God. But it's a very hard thing to do sometimes. It's a very hard line to walk, to say, I have an understanding of how I'm supposed to live, of how God is leading me to live, of what is right and what is wrong. The world, by the way, wants to say that something is wrong, is hateful, is judgmental, is intolerant. Jesus did it. They probably won't say that Jesus was hateful or intolerant, but Jesus said that there were things that were wrong. How we respond to things, how we respond to those people, is a different issue. But we cannot buy into what the world says we should be doing. We should be forever seeking what God says we should be doing. Back to the questions that we asked at the beginning. We have the mic.